Hello, and welcome to the Things I Want My Daughters to Know podcast, the podcast redefining women's health, one unfiltered conversation at a time. I'm your host, Jacqueline Rose, and every week I'll sit down with leading women's health experts and real women to share their lived experiences, bust health myths, challenge outdated and uninformed narratives, and explore what's really possible for women. We'll talk about periods, fertility, menopause, hormones, aging, and everything in between. This podcast is for every woman who ever felt confused, dismissed, or left out of the conversation about her own health. It is a space to celebrate women, break the silence, and open up conversations between mothers, daughters, sisters, and friends. Please hit the follow or subscribe button so you don't miss an episode, and share this podcast with your daughters, family, and friends. Let's get on with the episode. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Things I Want My Daughters to Know podcast. And I am really excited for today's conversation because I know we're going to talk about a lot of different things spanning some different perspectives on midlife women. I am really honored and excited to have today our guest, Dr. Nicola Harker. Welcome. Thank you for joining me. Nicola, tell us who you are, what you do, and we'll jump straight in.
Thank you. It's lovely to be here, and really, really excited to do this with you. So I'm a doctor by background. I'm a mum. I'm 55 this year, so I fit into the category of a woman navigating the world, navigating my own life and this stage of my life, also being a parent. And I left medicine back in 2017 and started a new career as a coach and a teacher of compassion. So yeah, I'm slightly unorthodox, I guess, in that sense, just coming from a varied background, but that's me.
Yeah. So we've got a lot to talk about, and we're going to start with where you came from that medical field. You were, a GP, and you lived a lot of years in that space. So I guess the big question is, why did you leave, and why have you switched to something very different, which is sort of obviously, we know that doctors should have compassion and, should channel that value. But what did you see in medicine? What did you see in family practice? What were you experiencing, especially as, a woman, as a mother? And then why the transition?
Mm. So actually, the word compassion, I think, is really important in here, because when I went to medical school, I was a very questioning student. I loved training as a doctor, but I was also asking a lot of uncomfortable questions. And one of the questions I asked a lot was, when are we going to have the lessons about dealing with suffering and death and all of the trauma that we're going to come across as doctors?
Yeah.
And the lesson never came. And I kept asking. And eventually somebody said to me, Nicola, you just have to build a wall in order to survive. And that really hit me. And I've never forgotten that conversation. But I looked around me and I thought, wow, if I'm going to do this, if I'm going to be a doctor, I can't see any alternative. Actually, it's so intense. You're learning so much information. And actually what people ahead of me, I could see them doing, the stethoscope goes around the neck, you start wearing your scrubs or your white coat, as it was in those days. You adopt your persona of being a doctor and you toughen up.
Yeah.
And
thick skin
and armor, building a wall.
Yeah.
But I was curious about that. And what I noticed is I was a doctor for over 20 years in the NHS. And I noticed that when you're wearing armor to protect yourself against the difficulties of the world, and this doesn't just apply to doctors, but we all do this. We armor up because the world is scary or it hurts us or whatever. Over time, it becomes harder for people to reach you. It's harder to ask for help because you have a level of disconnection because you're armored up.
Yeah.
And I noticed in myself that I also lost connection with myself. I didn't notice when I was
Mm,
hungry or when I needed to go to the loo. I was very outward with my compassion. I was, focused on the patient. I was focused on serving. And over time, I was forgetting about my body, my health, and I wanted to serve. And there was a crucial question in my mind that kind of really bothered me as a doctor, which was that I was a naturally empathic person, but I felt like I was being asked to choose between
mm,
empathy and surviving. That
yeah.
if I was empathic, that it was too much. It was just so much suffering. It was, appointments every 10 minutes. And I
Yeah.
would either cope during the day, but then I would come home and I was exhausted and I had nothing to give. And this became much more
Yeah.
visible when I had children because I
Yeah.
wanted to be present for my kids. But I was also really curious when I was moving into leadership roles. I was noticing, do I have to become sharp elbowed to be a leader, or could I be fully me and
Yeah.
retain my empathy,
Yeah.
and do leadership as well? And I was really, not finding answers to those questions, and nobody else was answering it for me. But then
Yeah.
I came across compassion. And I realized that the struggle I'd had was with unfiltered empathy. So empathy is important, but when we don't have any filter on that, when we have no way of managing our empathy, what happens is that if we can't fix something, we want to turn away because it hurts,
Yeah.
or we want to armor up because it hurts. And if you don't turn away, then you keep giving, 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 giving. You end up
Yeah.
burning out. And what I learned was that compassion is actually a skill set that adds in a layer of wisdom so that you can still have some empathy. You can recognize and lean into difficulty and suffering. But there's a skill set behind it which allows you to manage the discomfort and
Yeah.
know how to deal with that discomfort. And for me, that was a game changer because I want to be a connected, compassionate person who stays around when things are difficult. But I didn't
Yeah.
want to sacrifice and lose myself in the process, and I definitely didn't want to be hidden behind a wall of armor. So that was the internal tussle I had in my
Yeah.
in my career. Why did I end up leaving? Basically, the system in the UK was pushing towards a very anonymous kind of system. The appointments, rush, rush, rush. There's so much pressure on the system, but also bringing yourself was no longer apparently being valued, certainly where I was working. So
Mm,
it was very much just see as many patients as you can, as quickly as you can, as get them through the system. And it just felt like a conveyor belt. And the moral injury of working in a system where you couldn't really do a good job. I couldn't bring myself. I couldn't really
yeah.
look someone in the eye and say, what's really going on for you? Let me
Yeah.
listen to your story, because there was no time. I was starting to hate that. I was burning out, but also just feeling like I can't see the system changing. So I took that burnout as a signal that actually I need to give myself permission at this stage of my life to do what I do best and to give myself
Yeah.
time to be with people in a way that I can really hear their story and ask them what they need rather than coming up with an action plan in 30 seconds and
Yeah.
rushing
Yeah.
them through the
Yeah.
system. But that was really why I did.
So the system that you're describing and the experience you're describing, I'm sure is not unique to you. And we know that especially, COVID epidemic exacerbated or brought to light many of these issues. But what you're describing, and we're specifically talking about, your background is within the NHS, but I think it is happening in most Western medical healthcare systems. We're hearing so much of the burnout of
Mm,
people who have been in the medical healthcare field for 20 plus years. As you said, 10 minutes for a patient. You've got to sort of armor up. Forget about if you're working, if you're working in a clinic in a sort of more local community practice versus if you're working actually in a hospital where I think the pressures are even greater. Um, you're not actually doing what I can imagine, the original reason of why you went into medicine, which was to actually be that compassionate, empathic, helping person that can actually heal people.
mm,
None of that sounds like it's actually really happening. on the day to day. You've got to see people too quickly. The patient load is, really beyond, what humans are able to cope with. And you're telling the story from the practitioner's point of view, but what is the patient experience of that story that you're telling?
I think it puts a tremendous amount of pressure on patients, and not least because when we are struggling with some symptoms, there's a huge internal journey going on there. There's shame. There's am I making more of a fuss than someone else? Am I is this something serious? Is it actually am I experiencing night sweats because of menopause, or actually could I have an awful tumor or something more serious?
Yeah.
So we've got this huge internal journey that happens before people even make an appointment. And
Yeah.
if you're aware that the system's under pressure, you might avoid making an appointment. You might feel like you're not going to be heard. And then there's
Or
also
you even may make an appointment and only see someone 4 months down the line.
exactly. I mean, it might be difficult to get in, but also, not blaming any particular individuals, but if you don't feel heard and validated, you
Yeah.
then have a reaction to that. You're going to go away and feel either dismissive of yourself because they dismissed you, or upset with the doctor who may have been doing their best under the circumstances. So
Yeah.
I think it makes for a very untherapeutic environment, and it also, I think, puts tremendous pressure on us as patients. We're all patients, let's face it, to be able to articulate what's going on for us in a really concise and quick way, because the
Yeah.
time pressure is there. And
Yeah.
actually, sometimes I certainly look back at my own experiences, and sometimes we've got physical symptoms that are also entwined with hidden, maybe marital difficulties or
Yeah.
financial difficulties, or we're
Yeah.
worried about our teenage kids, and all of those things are factors in our health.
Yeah.
All of those things are playing into the way we present our symptoms, that we might come across
Yeah.
as one of my pet hates is when people write, "Oh, the patient was anxious" in the notes, because it's like a label of judging someone as being anxious. And I
Yeah.
that really makes me cross, because it's like, well, maybe they were just struggling to be heard or to be validated, or maybe this person is got a whole bunch of other things going on that you don't even know about. So
And that you're
I
not
think,
asking, and that you're not
yeah.
asking because in a 10-minute appointment as the doctor, you're asking medical related questions, not lifestyle or family or stress related questions.
That can often be the case, and obviously there are amazing doctors that really try and keep all of those things on the radar. But the reality is, if you're given 10 minutes, it's a lot of it is about risk assessment.
Yeah.
It's about coming up with a quick action plan. And yeah, there isn't room, and I know most doctors would love to have the luxury of that time, but yeah, for patients it's really unsatisfactory.
Yeah. In your work and from what you sort of heard from colleagues and maybe still hear from colleagues, do you see a difference between the way that male patients and female patients are related to? Do you see a difference between male doctors and female doctors are relating to their patients? Sort of, is there, I don't want to, ask a leading question if it's not there, but is there a gender divide or a gender
Yeah.
difference in the healthcare system as you experienced it and saw it?
I saw it, but also there's a lot of research evidence of this now, that women's pain is more likely to be dismissed,
Yeah.
even though, so for men it's different; they're more likely to present later. But for women, if they do present, pain is more likely to be dismissed. So, for example, with things like endometriosis and abdominal pain,
Mm-hmm.
and also things like joint pains and other things, there's a general cultural tendency to say, well, that's just part of being a woman, or that you're exaggerating your symptoms. And that's not something I was taught. It's more, that's a cultural challenge that we have. We
Right.
also know that research has historically been mostly based on the 70-kilo white male, which is
Yeah.
completely inappropriate for most of women's
Yeah.
health. And we also know that women doctors research has shown that women doctors spend more time with their patients, spend more time on their paperwork and their admin, like their referrals and things like that, and are higher rated by their patients, but are more likely to burn out. So
Yes.
we that's where the conundrum lies, isn't it? Is how do you do this well, and
Yes.
survive? But yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. It's that's not down to medical school training, but I think there's a lot of history in medicine. The way it's developed as an industry is
Yeah.
comes from a
Yeah. Yeah.
historical place,
Yeah.
and that
And
hasn't
in
changed.
and inbuilt and as you said, inbuilt gender bias that goes back through research, funding, drug trials, etc., etc.
Absolutely.
I want to ask you, I think you and I spoke about this previously when we had a conversation, and I can't remember who it's attributed to, and you probably do remember. Um, that I heard on a podcast someone who talked about the WW sign on the charts in hospital, that she was in her training years of becoming a doctor, and I really forget which doctor it is that talks about this, and maybe you remember, but during her hospital rotations, senior, attending would write WW on the chart to indicate the diagnosis of a whiny woman.
Okay.
Um,
Yes. So
and
it
that
wasn't
was,
me, but I have come across this kind of thing. Absolutely.
yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's very shocking.
There's again, inbuilt in the system that women's health traditionally and typically, and we know it's changing a little bit, we do know it's changing, but any doctor who was trained 10 years plus is going to have this inbuilt in the system of, as you said, not really understanding women's health issues, not validating a woman when she comes to talk about her symptoms, the comparison between male symptoms and female symptoms, and that many times in hospital situations or in acute care situations, when a woman is coming complaining of, for example, extreme abdominal pains, she's just a whiny woman, give her some pain relief medication and send her on her way without any type of understanding. And we know endometriosis is a perfect example. It can take anywhere from 5 to 11 years for a woman to be diagnosed because she keeps being brushed off with her pain experience.
Yeah. I mean, I haven't come across the WW particularly, but I mean, I find that horrifying as a woman,
Yeah.
as a human being, and I think also, you know, not to defend doctors, but I think that something to think about, to understand about the culture of medicine is that when you go in at 18 in the UK, that's when you start your training, and you're very much being trained um, to risk assess, but also there's an element of being trained to judge. And good clinical
Mm,
judgment is making
mm,
a quick observation and making a decision based on that. And I think
yeah.
that the dark side of that, the downside of
Yeah.
that, is perhaps not being aware of, and I would love there to be more training in medicine about this, and I think things are improving, but more aware of where judgment slips into bias. And all of us in society,
Mm,
we have bias. We make unconscious decisions in our mind about people without being aware of it. And so I really love talking to medical students and trainees about unconscious bias. I think it's really important, or
yeah.
just bias in general, conscious or not,
Yeah.
actually.
Yeah.
um, and I was very lucky when I was a trainee, when I was doing my psychiatry as an undergraduate, um, to be um, to be in a situation where my consultant asked me to go and take a history from a patient, and he gave me no information. And this was somebody who was a regular inpatient in the hospital in psychiatry. And this patient absolutely raved about sort of very persecutory ideas about being chased by the IRA and all of the kinds of things that people say when they are delusional, when they're having a psychotic episode.
Yeah.
And I took the history and I went back and I sat down with my consultant, and he said to me, all of what he told you is actually true. It actually happened to him.
Wow.
And it really made me think as a person how we unconsciously pigeonhole and go, right, okay, well, that person is clearly delusional, that
Yeah.
next he'll be telling me he's Jesus or whatever. And it really awakened me to that
Yeah.
side. So I was extremely lucky. But if you haven't had someone bring you up short in that way and really remind you
Yeah.
of, like, how would you assess that person's pain if they were um, male if they were black. Just thinking about these
Yeah.
things differently.
Yeah.
If you're not really challenged to think about that, I think it's really easy for any of us as human beings to slip into bias. So yeah,
Yeah,
it's a
yeah.
fascinating
And
subject.
I think what you're talking about judgment is actually, I've never thought about it in that way. Like at the end of the day, a doctor needs to make a judgment call
Mm.
about so many different things going on in real time. And the more they get in tune to doing that, very often, as you've brought up, the judgment call ends up becoming its own bias, sort of
Yes.
just reinforced bias. And I guess that's, as you said, the pros and cons of this field is that you
Yeah.
need to be making judgment calls, life or death judgment calls, in very real time.
Yeah, and we can get it wrong. And just like in law, it's the same, isn't it? There's a lot of judgment
Yeah,
in law. It doesn't mean we're
yeah,
always right.
yeah, yeah. Fascinating. So I guess the last question I want to ask you around your sort of medical time and your experience is the question that is really on, being talked about now is menopause education in um, medical training. And I know
Mm.
you did your medical training, a number of years ago, and we do know things are changing. But I think you are a great example, as I keep saying the whole time. Anyone who was trained 10 years plus, this is what they've experienced. And patients, especially midlife women, need to know that when they go into their doctor's, surgery for consultation, what knowledge is the doctor coming with around menopause? So maybe just share the menopause education you did or didn't receive in those very long years of medical training.
Yeah. Very little. First of all, it's
Yeah.
quite a short part of the training, but it was there, and but it's very it was because I'm quite old now, but it was very pharmaceutical based. So,
Yes.
in other words, totally around risk factors. Could this person have HRT or not? And then based on where they are in terms of their relative perimenopause or menopausal, and whether they have a family history, et cetera, which particular HRT is can be offered to them. And that's pretty much it. And
Yeah.
as a doctor, I will also say it was an annual or several times a year job to keep up with what's available. And
Yeah.
it's really fascinating to me that it's based on what the pharmaceutical companies tell you is best. And that's all you can really go on as a doctor, because you're just going on what's the evidence. The latest, when that big study came out in the 90s, the risk of deep
Yeah.
vein thrombosis, is it safe, is it not safe, all and the breast cancer and the stroke risk and everything. All of that research has emerged over the years since the 90s. But it's also on a background of an assumption that the menopause is for some women is something that needs to be treated, and
Yeah.
that's just the orthodox medical model, which I shouldn't really say because I was in it for over 20 years, but I was not always a huge fan of.
Yeah.
But I think that within the confines of the breadth of things that you have to know about as a doctor, that's what they focus on when you're
Yeah.
trained. So there's absolutely no, well, there wasn't then any nutrition training.
Yeah.
There's a huge amount of skepticism about anything that's outside of conventional pharmaceuticals.
Yeah.
Although I do think that's improved a little bit. The problem there is just the lack of funding for research around alternatives, or not even alternatives, but just
Yeah.
other ideas, other things that can be used. There was absolutely nothing about psychology or approach to midlife and it being an opportunity or a positive transition. Absolutely nothing.
Yeah.
It's all completely medical.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
anything I've learned about that has been my own experience of being a woman.
So I think that is the point, is that doctors are getting this, very specific narrative. And even gynecologists, it's not just family doctors, it's
Oh yeah.
gynecologists also. And gynecologists train, when they specialize, it's much more about surgical intervention. It's much more about, aging, issues like prolapse, they're not really learning about how menopause is showing up. Any medical practitioner who really wants to understand about, the range of symptoms, the women's different experiences based on, demographics or ethnicity, anything to do about the range of treatments, they need to go and self-learn it.
Yes, yes.
And I think that's really important to note here. And the other thing that you brought up is around the pharmaceutical companies. And I just want to understand that, again, we're not bashing the system and we're not bashing pharmaceutical companies. I just want to understand it so that women listening can understand the system that they're playing in. You meant, explain to me how that works. The pharmaceuticals to prescribe because of the pharmaceutical companies that are presenting their products to you. Just explain the process so that we understand it and we understand the system that we're functioning in.
Yeah, I think it's really fascinating. So in a sense, the way that lots of medicine works is that a problem to be fixed is identified, and the problem to be fixed might be identified by society, but it just as equally might be identified by pharmaceutical companies because they're an industry. But as a doctor, you're sitting there in the middle, really, between society coming in and saying, I'm having trouble with flooding, or I'm having terrible flushes, or whatever, and you're looking across at what the pharmaceutical companies have developed, and you're looking at the data sheets of which ones are well tolerated, which ones are easy to take in terms of the time of day, how often you take them, what are my options, and you almost have like a shopping list of options. Now, if you're interested in menopause, you will learn a much broader shopping list. If you're not particularly interested, if you're a GP and you're a bit frightened of the menopause, or you haven't spent a lot of time thinking about it, you might end up with a favorite continuous combined pill. You might end up just prescribing pills and not thinking about patches or gels or testosterone or all of those other things, particularly as a lot of that has evolved in the last maybe 10 to 20 years. So some people might just be like, oh, this is what I give for menopause. And that's all they give. And if that's what they were taught was the best, unless they go looking for the information, they won't know any different. And it's scary as a member of the public to think that people who are practicing in medicine, they can become de-skilled in different areas of medicine if they don't go out and look for the information, because there's so much to know. There's so much to know. And so if you've got a favorite pill and it's worked for all your other patients, you're going to it's human nature that you're going to stick to it.
And as you said, you either have to take a personal interest in it, and specifically or especially GPs that are, they may find interest in lots of different topics that they want to invest time and energy to study more on. But as we've said, limited time, limited resources, you've got to find the time to go and do extra trainings. And then if you're a specialist, you're going to find the extra trainings in your specific niche field. So it just becomes more and more siloed. And the information that is out there, again, it's not they want to do wrong by you. They just don't have access to it.
I think that's right. And in a sense, it's some healthy skepticism as a member of the public, I think, is important. Does this person know? But not making it personal. It's not because they are intentionally giving you the wrong information. It's just that maybe they've always used that particular product and it worked well. They just haven't gone and sought out something newer, something better. Yeah.
Okay. You left that field, and I totally can understand why. Explain to me where you are today, the work you do, and what you're focusing in on with your clients.
So I did two things at the same time when I left. I trained as a transformational coach, which is quite deep coaching. It's not just process driven. It's really working with people, on that inner journey. For example, one of the terms I really love, I work with a lot of women leaders, is inscaping, which is that we can't create the conditions that we're seeking in our organization until we create them in ourselves. So that's really kind of summarizes how I feel about leadership, how I feel about parenting, how I feel about showing up in society, is that there's that inner work that helps us to show up in a different way. And then I also, alongside the coaching, trained as a teacher of self-compassion. Kind of by accident, I came across a book about self-compassion and found myself um, unable to forget it, rather annoyingly. I was kind of irritated about this book because I was like, damn, why did I read that book? I can't unknow what I read. It was
What you
Kristin
know
Neff's book,
now.
Self-Compassion. And what she opened my eyes to was the concept that self-compassion isn't just being nice to yourself, because that's what I thought it was. It's just like, oh, well, I
Yeah.
should be nicer to myself. And of course, whenever I said to myself, oh, I should be nicer to myself, or people said it to me, my internal voice was screaming, yes, but you don't know how bad I am as a person. You don't, it's like I didn't feel worthy, actually,
Yes.
of being nice to myself. I felt like I had to work hard to be
Yeah.
to be valid, to be relevant, to serve. And so it all felt very self indulgent to think about being self-compassionate. So I had massive
Yeah.
resistance to the whole idea. And if you add in being a parent and being a doctor and being a wife, I really, like, that was way down on my list of
Yeah.
priorities. I just couldn't see
Yeah.
how it was possible. And I literally, when I read this book, I felt it like a punch to my gut, like winded by it. And I remember actually saying out loud, I can't. And I was cross. I was just like, it's another thing to add to my to-do list.
Yeah.
What would people think of me if I started to explore this concept? But I'm smart enough to realize that if you have that level of resistance to something, there might be
It's
something
telling you
there.
something.
So I went and trained. I did the training for myself, and then I went back and trained to teach it, because I
Mm,
realized, having done the training, wow, this is really interesting. And this, for me, was an ingredient that had been missing from all of the leadership that I'd seen around me in medicine.
mm,
And the more I thought about it, I thought, gosh, this is missing in politics. This is missing in education. My parents weren't taught this. Being a
yeah.
parent myself, I could have done with this earlier.
Yeah.
I just thought it was a really, really interesting subject. So I've ended up bringing those two things together in my coaching. And I
Okay.
coach individuals, I coach leadership teams, and I speak about compassion as well.
Amazing. So I definitely want to talk to you about the leadership piece, but I want to understand what you mean by compassion, um,
Mm.
especially for women, especially for midlife women. What sort of, how is that showing up? What does that mean? How is it being expressed? What resistance do sort of women have to it? And what are sort of the lessons here that you're imparting to your clients?
Mm. So yeah, it's a skill set. This is something that you can learn, first of all. And that for me was like a relief. It's like, okay, I don't know this yet, but I can learn.
Yeah,
So
it's not
there are
like
a
something
few.
intuitive that you
No,
just
you're not.
know.
We all worry, oh my God, am I not compassionate? But so there are three flows of compassion: outward compassion, which we tend to find an easier concept;
Yeah.
receiving compassion from other people, which we feel a bit squirmy about, a bit like, oh, I'm not used to
Yeah.
that; and then self-compassion, which is the one that 76% of people find harder, much
Right.
harder to be compassionate to themselves than other
Yeah.
people. So some people can do this, but most of us can't.
Yeah.
Um, and then there are different layers to the skill set. So one is around the way we address ourselves, our internal dialogue, our inner voice. Now, when I first thought about this, I realized that I actually clung to my inner critic like a teddy bear. I was not going to let it go. And
Wow.
so I unpacked that for myself. Why am I so resistant to the idea of changing that inner critical voice? And I
Yeah.
realized that I'd got through life sort of believing that my inner critic helped me to have my moral compass, my high
Mm,
standards. That actually, if I didn't have it, I wouldn't get out of bed. I would be lazy. So I wasn't going to let go of that easily. The idea of letting go of it was terrible to me. But what I realized through learning about compassion is that actually our inner critical voice is very demotivating. It doesn't serve us in the way we think it does. So if you've just, you've been trying to eat healthily all week and then you eat a piece of cake and your inner critic kicks in, you're really quite likely to have another piece of cake after that, because
right.
you've already blown it. In your mind, you're already a
Yeah.
really bad person. You might as
Yeah.
well have a bottle of wine as well while you're at it. It's kind of, so that's what happens when our inner critic gets into the driving seat. It's demotivating. The same if you took an exam and you failed it, and
Yeah.
your inner critic is driving the inner conversation, how motivated do you feel to start revising, preparing again for another exam?
Yeah.
You don't. You feel like a
Is
loser.
the do we think that the inner critic is meant to be like a motivating voice?
Yeah, I
You know,
think most
like
people.
if you yeah, like if you sort of like it's going to you don't want to be that person, so it's going to motivate you to behave differently. That's
Exactly.
sort of the
We
rationale
think of it.
behind it.
Yeah, we don't necessarily consciously think that, but when
Yeah.
we are resisting changing it, it's because we think, well, but it's what keeps me kind of socially acceptable. And
Yeah.
so we don't want to think about changing that. But when I realized, gosh, it's not really helping me that much, what I learned was actually that if we can cultivate a an authentic and honest internal friend, so one that's going to kick you up the backside if you need it, but
Yeah.
does it through love, through a sense of I want to help you, I want to support
Yeah.
you, and I'm going to remind you that you said you were going to do this thing like exercise or eating healthily or whatever, because that's what you really want for yourself, not because there's
Yeah.
something wrong with you. And
Mm.
it's like it's a very subtle but important change, that we
Yeah.
stop
Yeah. Yeah.
dragging ourselves down with our internal conversation, and we actually have that sense of like, you can do this, you can improve, you can still have high standards, you can still want to be a really good person, but with a different internal voice. So that was really important for me.
Wow.
The second thing is around physiology, which really fascinated me as a doctor, which is that our brain cannot tell the difference between someone external to you shouting criticism or you saying it to yourself. It doesn't have
Wow.
a distinguisher for that. So when I'm saying to myself, Nicola, you're completely useless, my brain can actually is experiencing that as somebody saying that to my face.
Saying that. Right.
And what happens when we receive that kind of external criticism, same with that inner critic, is it throws us into threat mode. That's where we're mediated by adrenaline and cortisol. We're
Yeah.
in that stressy place where
Yeah.
we're not creative, we're not connected, we're not able to reach out to other people. We're in this kind of like, oh, I'm a bad person, and we
Yeah.
push ourselves into threat mode through the things we say to ourselves. And when I realized that, I thought, gosh, that's not a very good idea. We've already got social media and
Yep.
email and our boss. And why would we add to threat mode when we're already quite stressed out as people?
Yeah.
And this is where I started to think about high performance. I realized that actually, when we learn the skills of self compassion, we're using a different emotional system, which is called the mammalian caregiving system, which is mediated by oxytocin. It's a really lovely hormone that makes you
Hormone.
feel love, connection.
Yeah.
It moves you into that soothed parasympathetic state. And what that does is it acts as a natural antidote to threat mode. So it actually helps you to deal with stress.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, so if I stop beating myself up, I'm actually going to handle stress better. That
Yeah.
seems like a really good idea to me. So
Wow.
there are different layers to the skills. It's not all about the way we think, but some of it is. And some of it
Yeah.
is about the way we manage difficulty. So the
Yeah.
third thing I would say about self-compassion, I realized when I was reading about it and learning about it, that I had spent years of my life thinking that if I was struggling, I was in some ways wrong. Like there was something wrong with me. And
Okay.
I was
Okay.
always trying to get back to perfect. And when I thought about this and when I was learning this, I realized how completely upside down that is, that all of us struggle most of the time. Like we're
Yeah.
either late or we've lost something or we don't know what to do or we're worried
Yeah.
about something. Struggle is a normal part of human existence. So
Yeah.
instead of feeling bad about myself for struggling, what the skills of self compassion taught me was to support myself through struggle rather
Mm.
than judging myself
Okay.
for struggling. And I think this is really useful for the menopause because, many of us, if we feel ourselves flushing when we're in a public place, or we wake up in the night drenched in sweat, or we just feel emotionally all over the place, or
Yeah.
whatever it is that we're struggling with, we will react against ourselves for having those symptoms.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
instead of the self-compassion approach to that is, this is the phase I'm in, this is what I'm experiencing. What do I need to do to support myself? whilst I'm going through this. And what I really noticed about physical symptoms and self-compassion is when we stop resisting them, they immediately diminish.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And I learned this when I had a back injury, dealing with pain, that the secondary suffering that comes from the struggle, our reaction to something, is often
Yeah.
bigger than the actual problem itself.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Now, it's not to diminish the
Fascinating.
symptoms, but it's about just recognizing we can reduce our symptoms through the way we approach them.
Fascinating. So much to unpack here. And what I am thinking about specifically is I know you work with men and women. I know you have male and female clients. And are you seeing this come up differently for men and or for women? And in terms of the demographic of sort of that midlife woman and that leader, the sort of high achieving or the woman who has a lot of responsibility, whether it be at home or in her work life, where she has often not had that compassionate piece sort of motivating her. And especially as you mentioned, being in leadership levels, being in levels of, responsibility where you've got to be a little bit, as you mentioned, tough, a little bit, sharp elbows. How do especially women respond to this type of approach? It must be for some women very jarring and really very, very uncomfortable.
So a few questions in there. So a couple of things to say. So firstly, this is the need for self-compassion is universal. It's not just a women thing. And it's
Right.
been really lovely to work with men as well. The challenges are slightly different, I think, and I don't
Yeah.
want to overgeneralize, but I think for men, the social messaging is much more around you shouldn't have emotions at all.
Yes.
You're
Yes.
perhaps allowed to get angry, but that's pretty much it. And so the walls for men are much more around the fact that they feel emotions but don't have aren't allowed to
To
articulate them or
express
don't
them.
or
Yeah.
don't have a vocabulary for expressing it.
Yeah.
Um, for women, we're very familiar with the societal messaging that that tells us all sorts of things, like we should be people pleasing, and that that we put aside our needs. And so for many women, the resistance
Yeah.
comes from, like, I would be considered selfish if I
Yes.
go down this route. So it's
Yeah.
almost like the resistance is different, but the need is universal. And
Yeah.
yeah, obviously I don't want to overgeneralize, but those are the kind of themes that come
Yeah.
out. Um, I but definitely with this work, I work um, in a with permission and at the right pace for clients, because it's quite threatening, and
Yeah.
there's a fear. I definitely felt this, that actually, please don't ask me to look at these feelings. If I take the lid off, like, I'll never stop crying.
Yeah.
That was definitely where I was at the start. And
Yeah.
so, something that's my teacher actually said, and I really think this is important, is it's not compassionate to rip off the plaster and dig around in the wound.
Mm.
So that's not really the intention. So I tend to keep the principles in the back of my mind. I'm not teaching when I'm coaching, but I'm looking out for and noticing the way through language in particular we will
Yeah.
say things. We will be apologetic for feeling something, or uh, we'll I'll notice in physiology that the wall is up. So I'm perceptive, but and I'm not going to say to someone, you have to bring down your wall. What I'll do is we'll just lean into that.
Yeah.
What's going on there, what's that experience, and then working very compassionately with those difficult feelings, and
Yeah.
gradually helping my clients to recognize that they can feel difficult things and they can move through them. And it gives you
Right.
tremendous confidence when you learn those skills, when you start to notice, I'm dealing with things better. I'm feeling like I can be more myself. And
Yeah.
actually, for a lot of men and women in leadership roles, there's a tremendous pressure to be more authentic and to be more connected as leaders. But if we haven't been taught how, and there isn't the
Yeah.
psychological safety to do that, that's really difficult.
And often, even though we're being told, especially in today's language, of you've got to be more authentic, you've got to show up in a more connected way, often that can come across as weakness. If I reveal
Exactly.
too much of myself, then I'm not going to be that leader that people are going to look up to. I'm going to be perceived as weak or emotional.
Absolutely. And I hear that time and again. And it's really
Yeah,
fascinating when work with seniors and juniors and can get them to talk to one another, where the juniors are saying, I'm desperate to hear how you dealt with that difficulty. Did you find it
yeah,
difficult too? Rather than the walled in. But it takes courage, and it definitely requires a level of psychological safety in place first, and an
yeah,
understanding of what you're doing. So yeah, you don't force this. It's about seeing it as a skill set that you can build gradually. And when you see it working, it's easy to build on it. I
yeah.
think that's the way I would approach it.
So I understand the process. I understand where you want what you're trying to achieve. Why would someone come to you in the first place? Sort of how are they presenting? Like, how do they know that they need a compassion coach or a transformation coach? Like, what is the reason for them turning to you in the first place? And I'm sure that very often they're coming to you not even realizing the journey that they're about to
Yeah.
embark on with you.
No, absolutely. I think that's the case for all of us, isn't it? We will book in with somebody for the obvious thing, but actually there's something else underneath.
Exactly,
I
exactly.
think many of my clients are questioning where they are and is this really what I want? So when we've worked really hard to get
Yeah,
somewhere in our lives and then we get there and we realize I can't keep doing what I've been doing to get to this point. So
yeah,
something
yeah,
needs to change. And is it me that needs to change, or my work or my family situation? So those kind of transitions, I think sometimes it's very practical things like, why are other people being promoted above me, or I'm being asked to lead,
mm,
but I don't feel like I have any authority. So it's around
yeah,
getting really comfortable and centered in ourselves and that kind of work. Um, Burnout is a big one, and obviously
yeah,
burnout was the trigger for my journey. So sometimes, you know, people will come to me and they've either they're aware they're about to burn out, or maybe they've repeatedly burnt out. They've had, mini burnouts,
mm,
and they know that they don't want to continue like this.
that
I
again.
also I think I mentioned that one of the tipping points in my own journey was having children. That adding
Yeah,
in children when you're an ambitious working woman is a whole new, a level of
yeah,
difficulty and loss of control, because kids are very unpredictable and their needs are
yeah.
unpredictable. And it's also a shame minefield, being a parent. It
Mm,
really challenges us. And so quite a few people are highly successful, but they're feeling worried about the impact that's having on their family, or that, their
right.
relationships, their kids, feeling
Or
shame
how they
about that.
show up. Yeah, how they're able to
Yeah,
show up for their family. Yeah,
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 yeah. And those things are really difficult to talk about. So, finding a coach that's confidential, but also who gets this stuff is
yeah,
really important. You've got to find the right person to talk to
yeah,
even talk about that stuff.
yeah,
So, and I guess because I have a medical background, my clients feel some level of confidence that if they're saying to me, I don't know if I'm like this because of perimenopause or what else, they
yeah.
know that I can hold all of those things in my mind and for them at the same time. And
Right.
sometimes, there'll be a conversation about, well, it might be worth getting some advice on that.
Yeah.
And at the same time, I know, because I understand physiology, that stress and grief and life changes could really magnify our
Or
symptoms.
playing a
So
role.
yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
And I guess the last question that I want to sort of focus on here is with the midlife demographic of your clients, are you seeing common threads? Are you seeing common themes come up? Are your clients coming and saying very sort of similar things? Are you seeing sort of a commonality within that demographic of your clients, of that sort of perimenopausal, menopausal woman, and how she's showing up?
Yeah, I'm smiling. It may be that I'm attracting a certain type of client, but there is, because that does happen. There's an emerging conversation that happens, not at the beginning necessarily with my clients, but as they go through the work with me, of really wanting to speak up and coming to
Mm,
terms with rage. interestingly, which we've been taught we shouldn't be as little girls.
Yep.
Um,
Yep.
but also really being able to use and feel comfortable with their power, of having a voice, being themselves, saying, I actually don't really mind what other people think anymore. Something that
Yeah.
surprises my clients in a sense, because they've, all through their life, maybe they worried about those things. But the emergent, I really just think this stage of life is
Yeah.
an amazing opportunity to take all of that experience and wisdom and to use it really positively.
Yeah.
And the energy that comes from really kind of coming into that alignment in yourself. You can see in my body as I'm describing it, there's that sense of, this is me. I've survived a lot, and I know I can
Yeah.
survive more. And I'm also going to really value myself and look after myself. When you come into that
Mm.
energy, it's really powerful. So I absolutely, obviously, you can see in my face, I absolutely love working with my clients, because to see that
Yeah.
evolution, that
Yeah.
sense of just like, right, okay, this is me world, and I'm here, and I don't need to apologize for that,
Yeah.
is lovely. Yeah, it's really wonderful.
Amazing. Amazing. Look, Nicola, the work you're doing is so fascinating, and you really are bringing that experience. And the thing that I'm really hearing from you is your personal journey is really informing the way that you're showing up for your clients, because you really understand what they've gone through, and you really understand um, the struggle of what it means to be, a working woman in a leadership role in a situation that ended up not serving you, and how you're now using that and the language that you're bringing to your clients as a result of that. And I really love that you're sort of taking your own experiences and supporting now clients in the way that you are. And the compassion language is so missing, and the way that you're framing it is really, really interesting, because I guess I never thought that there were those three elements of compassion. For me, it was always, the self-compassion is the one that sort of is the one that we're most familiar with.
Mm.
So it's really interesting to hear how you're working and how you're integrating all of that.
Thank you.
Yeah. So as we end, I ask everyone, all my guests, the same question. This podcast is called "The Things I Want My Daughters to Know." I love having these conversations and giving that next generation of girls this information that we've either had to really struggle to learn, or we've had to learn through our life experiences. So, what is the one message that you want your daughter to know? Your goddaughters, your nieces, that next generation of women. If you could, shout it from the rooftops, what's the one thing that you want them to really know?
Oh, I know immediately what this is. And so it's not what you might expect from a coach. It might be believe in yourself. Actually, what I would say is believe yourself. And what I mean by that
Ooh.
is, I think our bodies are so wise, but we're also
Mm.
taught to not believe ourselves, not believe our symptoms, our thoughts, etc. So what I would really want to sort of impart is that sense of, value your wisdom, listen to yourself. It
Yeah.
doesn't mean we have to believe every thought that we have, because sometimes we take ourselves in unhelpful directions. But
Yes.
actually, that inner guide is talking to you, and through your body is talking to you. And
Yeah.
yeah, other people aren't going to do this for you, so believe yourself.
Yeah, I think that's so profound. I think it's so important. I think with all the noise, we often get distracted, or we can't listen to that voice. And as you said, often when we are listening, we get distracted by other thoughts, or thoughts that take us in other ways. And we really need to connect to that inner voice so much more. I really, really love that message. So, Nicola, thank you. Tell everyone listening, where can they find you? Where are you hanging out? If they want to learn more about what you do, where can people reach you?
So I have a website, nicolaharkercoaching.com. So, and you can sign up to get regular emails from me there. I'm on
Amazing.
LinkedIn mostly as my social platform as Nicola Harker Coaching. And also I will share my email address, support@nicolaharkercoaching.com. If you want to drop me an email, let me know that you've listened to the podcast. I will send you a meditation. I don't turn all my clients into meditators or mindfulness experts, but what I do is I work a lot with our body and our senses and visualizing and really listening to
Amazing.
that internal voice. So I'll send you a recording for your personal use to help with that journey.
Amazing. Amazing. Nicola, this has been such a far-reaching conversation. I so value sharing your medical perspective. I know it is sometimes a little bit personal and challenging because you were in a space that you then left. So I really, really value you sharing that piece of your story, and obviously all the coaching work that you're doing. I love it. I've loved getting to know you more, and we've connected a few times, and I really, really am so grateful that you've shared all your thoughts and wisdom with the audience. So thank you for being here and for doing that. And to everyone listening, please follow Nicola. As you can hear, she really knows what she's talking about because she's integrating a lot of different modalities. And rate, review, comment, do all those wonderful things that listeners are meant to do. Follow, subscribe to the podcast, and most importantly, share with your daughters. These are really important conversations that we want to be having with that next generation. So thank you everyone for listening, and I look forward to you joining me in another episode of the Things I Want My Daughters to Know podcast.